How we doing? How we doing? This is Destination Denver, Colorado, and if you blinked about 2 weeks ago, you missed the biggest rate story in multiple years. Well, we're here to talk about the state of housing as we go into February, and we're starting right now. All right, this is Destination Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jimmy Everett. Listen, there are two things we do here. We talk all things eating, living, breathing, experiencing the Denver Metro and Colorado Front Range. And two, as a licensed mortgage broker covering the entire state of Colorado and team with some of the state's most talented realtors, we're helping people like you move here each and every day. So the number and email you see on your screen, just know that I'm always the person, answer your phone calls, answer your texts, answer your emails there when and if you need me. Now that we're done with that fun-filled stuff, let's get to what we're here for, and that is the February housing market update. All right, so if you are paying attention to housing, if you're paying attention to rates, you might have noticed that for about 24 hours, interest rates hit 5.99% on the national 30-year average. Again, that lasted about 24 hours, and that's the lowest rate we have seen since the summer of 2022 as rates started to increase. So initially big news. Now, before we get too excited, as of the making of this video, rates have gone back to 6.25%. And this is built off of a lot of different news that we're going to get into and how it's impacting housing as we get towards the tail end of winter and soon to be into the spring. So when we talk about interest rates, let's first capture the idea that mortgage rates are not set directly by banks. It's not like banks wake up one morning and decide, here's the interest rate. Mortgage rates are priced off of the 10-year treasury market, the mortgage-backed security and its yields, and the mortgage spread, which is the difference between the 10-year treasury and where mortgage-backed securities are. So as the 10-year moves, we always talk about the mortgage-backed security market, and mortgage rates tend to follow. And so the market mood has fluctuated for a long period of time. You have certain factors at play here. You have policy surprises like executive actions or agency changes or decisions made by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the conventional lenders or GSEs that control these things. You have geopolitical headlines. Anything that spooks risk, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Greenland, whether it's Iran, whether it's China, you name it, if it spooks the market, it can really impact rates. And then you have the core of how all of this works, and that usually stems from inflation and job numbers. So as you get this data on where inflation is and where the labor market is, that is usually the largest and most sustainable driver of where mortgage rates are. So rates can improve quickly off of headlines, but they can also retreat as more data comes in. So what happened? So around January 9th, we get an announcement from Donald Trump that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, initially he just said the government, but Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were going to dump $200 billion in funds into the mortgage-backed security market. The government was going to buy bonds. And this initially drove rates down to that 5.99% mark. Now let's keep in mind, when I say that, we're talking about people with top tier credit putting typically 20 to 25% down. It's not as though everybody gets 5.99. But regardless, that 200 billion really had that initial impact. And what it did, I mentioned that spread at the beginning between the 10-year treasury and the mortgage-backed security market, it squashed that spread. So the 10-year treasury really didn't move. It actually increased. So you get this brief period of time where rates go down to 5.99 and then right back up to roughly 6.25% as of the making of this video. So again, why did it happen? Well, there's a few different reasons. One, the market realizes this isn't Federal Reserve policy. The Fed has a lot more control over things like this. This was an executive action using Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and their cash reserves. It's not as strong. The second item is that they have limited firepower. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had about $247 billion to work with. That number is debatable as of their numbers back in November. And they initially had a cap lift. They had an amount that they were limited to of $40 billion. That was then raised to $225 billion on January 12th. So they're borrowing the money from somewhere. Read that as our tax dollars or money that have been pumped into the mortgage security market from all of these loans being done. So even people like Morgan Stanley, the company obviously Morgan Stanley, said that this was going to be a small adjustment to mortgage rates. Add on to that the volatility factor of the market. I don't know if you've heard, but lately Greenland has been in the news a lot. So you have these geopolitical tensions, you have Greenland comments, you have Venezuela in action, and that creates a lot of market uncertainty. Also, the biggest reality check is this. The mortgage-backed security market, again, that controls mortgage rates, is a market of about $13 trillion. At the end of the day, $200 billion is 1.5% of that market. It's basically your credit card rebate you get for shopping, and I don't see anybody paying off their credit card debt by using their rebate points from their credit card. So the consensus throughout the market is that mortgage rates are still going to hover around that 6 to 6.4% mark. I think 6.4% is admittedly high for the 30-year average. Now, Fannie Mae does predict that that might drop down to about 5.9% in Q4 of 2026. I think that's possible, but still you would expect interest rates to stay somewhere around that 6 to 6.25% mark. They have at least held steady, and that's been a very positive thing for the market. For the longest time, we had these huge fluctuations of rates, so to see them hold steady has been very positive. And with all this noise, it's also going to keep the Fed on hold. So they are going to meet here very soon in February, at the end of January they'll meet. Odds are they'll keep the Fed fund rate, which is the short-term rate, held steady. Odds are we won't get a lot of Fed activity in the coming months. And so it's important to note that this is, to me, a temporary plateau. I think we'll be here for a while, but this is our new stable. For quite a while, we were in the high sixes. We just kind of sat there with these occasional dips. I think we'll remain in the low sixes for a while, and that will give sustained stability to the market, which is something we desperately need. So roughly a month ago, if you were buying at about 6.5%, 6.35%, you were affording roughly a $466,000 home if you wanted a $3,000 mortgage payment. Now, with a $3,000 monthly budget, your purchase price has increased to about $480,000. So you've gained about 14 to 15 grand in the market just by rates improving. At the same time, we're still seeing sellers have to negotiate. It's not like homes are flying off the shelf. So you're getting the advantage of a slightly improved interest rate while still being able to get the concessions, still being able to negotiate. Now, over a 6-month comparison, that gap is wider. You know, back 6 months ago, we were sitting around 6.8%. For that same $3,000 payment, your purchase price was closer to $450,000. So look at this period as increasing your buying power, again, for a roughly $3,000 payment, by about 30 grand in purchase price. That's a pretty solid number. Not game-changing, not life-changing, but certainly solid progress. Now, this is where things get really interesting for buyers over the long term, short term and long term. So you have median household income that is expected to grow about 2.8% in 2026. At the same time, home price appreciation nationally is supposed to be between 1 to 3% nationally. Denver, we're looking at 0.5% to 2% based on most estimates. That means Denver, that income to household shift that we've seen, that gap between your income and that household cost, is slowly but surely narrowing. And it's been a long time since that occurred. Obviously, they've been pushing further and further. This is the first time since the Great Recession, since 2008, 2009, that wages are rising faster than home prices are. That, again, given enough time, that is a big deal. And so it used to be, hey, if you don't buy this month, the house, you don't buy this year, the house is going to be more expensive. It's going to get farther away from you. For the first time in basically 20 years, every month you wait, right now, as long as rates are higher, every month you wait, your buying power relative to the price of the home improves. Again, that's the first time we've been able to say that in roughly 20 years. So First American data reports that we'll see a 3% improvement in housing affordability. That's expected from the tail end of 2025 to the tail end of 2026, about a 3% improvement. What that means is they see us getting back to about the affordability of summer 2022. That's not great. That is still post-pandemic where homes appreciated, but it is before the rate increase, the dramatic rate increases we saw. So again, good news that we're trending in a positive direction. It's also critical to understand that by the tail end of 2026, it's estimated that roughly 10 million homes will have 6% or higher interest rates. And those are people that are more likely to move. One of the things we've talked about is rate lock, where people have a great rate, they don't want to move, they're going to stay where they are. As more time passes, more of these people buying homes have higher rates. There is the chance that they are no longer locked in, that they will move, and that helps the market. Now, on the negative side, we got to quickly cover insurance, and this has been quite a bombshell for the market. So the average Colorado homeowner's insurance as of this year is about $4,100 a year. Again, that's average. You have some expensive homes that push that up, but over the last 10 years, that's an increase of 137%. And the reason for this is you have year-round hail and wildfire risks, and that has been growing, especially in certain parts of the Colorado Front Range. So this forces buyers to lower their price range or change their home type to look for a different home or a different location that isn't gonna have that insurance burden. When you're talking about adding roughly $340 a month to housing costs on top of the mortgage, that definitely impacts people. So homeowners insurance is a huge factor for a lot of folks. Now for home sellers, listen, you're annoyed. There are people like me telling you it's not 2021 anymore. And at the end of the day, if you still think it is, no one can help you anyway. But you really need to tell the difference between the type of market you are in as far as whether you are an attached or detached home, because these markets are very different. So for a detached home in Denver, as of the making of this video, the median price in December of 2025 sat at $625,000. That's a year-over-year change of less than 0.5%. So very similar to what we saw the previous year. Months of inventory, we talk all the time about if no house sells, how many months will we go before we run out of houses? That sits at about 3.7 months. What I found interesting, the typical listing price to closed price sat at 98.37%. So you saw a little more than 1.5% decrease in sales price. A lot of that could be concessions going to buyers, but just understanding that most sellers are not getting their full list price. Average days on market sat at 35 days. That's actually up 5 days from 2024. And you're slowly but surely seeing those days on market increase to the point, we get closer to that 2-month mark, which is key. We'll talk about that. Now, if we talk about attached homes, this is where things get interesting because your median price, again, in December sat at $385,000. That's actually down nearly 3% from the previous year. So attached homes are down. There's more inventory as well. You have about 5 months of inventory in that space. Days on market is similar, around 38 days. And currently there's about 2,700 units available in the Denver metro area. Big issue for a lot of these condos and a lot of these townhomes, but specifically condos, are rising HOA fees and insurance costs. Again, we talk about those insurance costs increasing. HOAs, you're looking at these properties where the HOA is $400, $500, $600 a month on top of your mortgage, and you're not really getting a lot of amenities for it. And some other key factors just to consider, the sales to list ratio metro-wide was 95.3%. So again, houses selling for about 5% less. The condo market is really going to drag that down. Homes selling above list price, only 1 out of 10 sold above their list price. So just understand that right now, roughly 60% of homes that are listed are selling for less than they are listed for. Not a bad thing. I believe that home prices have to correct somewhat from the pandemic. But people just have to have the right expectations. A key component here that I want to touch on is the 70-day psychological wall. And we're seeing that with a lot of folks, not just in the Denver metro, nationwide. So in Denver, days on market, they hit this crucial threshold. So once a house hits about 70 days on market, you start to see a seller's psychology change. They stop thinking about profit, and a lot of times they start thinking about survival, and it becomes a bit more strategic. So this is where these buy downs live. This is where people start offering concessions to buyers. Hey, come buy this house, we'll give you this. So a lot of people aren't asking for a price drop. Instead of you dropping the price 15 grand, they're asking you to give them 15 grand to cover closing costs, to lower their interest rate. And that's really where this market goes. So if you see a house that's been sitting on the market for 10 weeks, the seller is probably checking Zillow views, really starting to freak out. That 70-day mark is really where the poop starts to hit the fan. Some very quick factors about Denver when we're talking about really highlighting specific locations. Outperformers in the market right now: Sloan's Lake, Rhino, Central Park. These are 3 neighborhoods that have steady appreciation. There's still somewhat limited inventory. You have a lot of modern townhomes. You have a lot of new builds. So again, Sloan's Lake, Rhino, Central Park. Value opportunities out on West Colfax, which is close to Sloan's Lake. Arvada, Thornton, Centennial, and with Arvada, Thornton, and Centennial, you're seeing larger homes for sale. You're seeing lower prices on these homes. So where affordability is where people are following. Couple quick things, and I know I mentioned condos earlier, something to really keep an eye on, and this depends on the condo project. This is not just condos in general, but in certain areas and certain projects, you have the condo death spiral. So while single family homes are just slow in general, there are certain specifically condo projects that are in a death spiral. There's no way. They are in genuine crisis. So you have insurance premiums for HOAs in Colorado, again, I mentioned that earlier, have spiked so high, certain maintenance on these properties spiking so high that the HOAs are in peril. So they have to come back, they have to hit people with special assessments, increasing the amount they collect, whether it's a one-time fee or monthly. So we're starting to see this stagnant inventory, like Aurora and Lakewood has some that I've seen recently where buyers can afford the $400,000 mortgage, but they cannot afford to pay a $700 HOA on top of that, and they don't know if that HOA is going to go up in the future. So you have people who are living in these condos, they want to sell, but they're stuck. They can't get out of them. Many of them cannot be financed in your typical ways because the HOA has certain issues. So the condo market is a very vulnerable position in the housing market, and that's where if you're considering a condo, whether you're considering selling or buying one, you need to be talking to the experts, and I'm not sugarcoating that. Couple last things I would mention here is the Wall Street boogeyman. So a lot of activity out of Washington. They're saying, there was executive orders signed by Trump saying that these institutional investors will no longer be able to buy real estate. Now, there's some language in that executive order that says that these institutional investors can still build communities to be rented. So there's certainly some loopholes there. But overall, you're talking about these institutional investors that own less than 3% of the market. The big drivers when it comes to investors, roughly 80% of all investment properties are owned by mom and pop investors, people who own somewhere between 1 to 10 doors. And so when buyers are saying that they're competing against Wall Street, in reality, for the most part, with some exception, they're not. They are competing against people who have cash, maybe they have equity in their house already, so they're able to pull a HELOC and buy it. Maybe they're a boomer or a Gen Xer like myself, who has a little cash aside and can purchase. And that's something that very few people are going to bring up. Are we going to restrict how many homes that an individual, like how many homes can I own before I'm hoarding, before I'm affecting the market too much? So we can blame Wall Street. Certainly they have their own, blame to be passed along, but mom and pop, 8 out of 10 of these investment properties that are being purchased are by individuals, and how you regulate that and really where you draw the line between good old-fashioned capitalism and what's not good for the greater good, that's going to be very tricky. So some quick predictions to just wrap us up. Home prices again in Denver, I would expect, again, that 0.5% to 2% in most areas. There will be some higher activity in certain desired areas, but for the most part, Denver is in correction territory where I think appreciation will stay flat for multiple years. Sales volume, they're talking about an increase of 3 to 14% nationally. I think Denver is likely to see a modest increase. Again, our home prices are still too high. You can expect inventory to remain elevated, but not overabundant. It's not like every house on the neighborhood. It'll certainly look like more homes for sale than we're used to. We're used to not seeing any homes for sale. So when you go through a neighborhood and you see 3 houses on the same block, it's like mind-boggling. Expect that to level out. Expect rates to stay around 6 to 6.25% roughly. You'll see some estimates slightly lower, slightly higher. I think they'll stay around 6 to 6.25%. What won't happen, again, I'll say it every single time, no housing crash. We're still short roughly 4 million homes once you get to, again, corrected prices. Do not expect a rate plunge. The Fed is on hold. Structural factors within our economy move very slowly. There's nothing that would drive rates down rapidly. Do not expect a return to 2021. That's just, again, not in the cards foundationally. And don't expect a price collapse because home equity is too high. People have too much money in their homes. So they have a lot of different options because of all that equity. I think overall this is extremely healthy for the housing market. I think this, again, gets that gap between income and housing affordability. It narrows it. We're getting to a better place. It's gonna take time. It's gonna take multiple years, but we are getting there. So as far as our actionable activity here, listen, I tell people all the time, get approved as early as you can. There's a lot of lenders such as myself who will do it with a soft pull of credit that's very unintrusive. So just get information, however that looks. If you're thinking about selling a house, you're thinking about buying a house, you're thinking about renting a house, talk to people as early as you possibly can. If you're gonna wait for 5% interest rates, you're gonna be waiting for a while. If you're gonna wait for major price drops, you're gonna be waiting for quite a while. So that is completely up to you. What you can explore is rate buy downs that will help affordability. You can widen your search as far as neighborhoods. And obviously there's some, and when I say creative financing, I would say strategic financing that can put you in a very good position. And if you're planning for the future, you're 12 to 24 months out, great. Because again, like I mentioned earlier in this video, this is the first time potentially in our adult lifetimes where the market isn't running away from you. You can keep up with the market even if you don't intend to buy a home for multiple years. And if you're selling a house, listen, talk to some quality agents. Make sure you find one that has sold plenty of houses recently, that knows how to price a home, knows how to be strategic. At the end of the day, I always encourage people to hire a professional. And I don't benefit from you selling your house with an agent or not. That has nothing to do with me at the end of the day. Certainly help people buy homes. I don't help people sell them. So all I would say is in this market, you need an expert. And once you find your expert, listen to them. If you want to go through the trouble of not hiring someone, or if you want to go through the trouble of hiring an expert and then not listening to them, again, that's your problem, and I apologize for the pain and suffering you're going to go through throughout that process. But hey, the year is off to a good start. Unfortunately, the Denver Broncos just lost the AFC Championship game, and that is usually the sign for when the Denver housing market picks up. So that will be our unfortunate consolation prize next year when Bo Nix is back. We're going to the Bowl. This is Destination Denver, Colorado. I am your host, Jimmy Everett. That was your February housing market update. Until I see you next time, peace.